everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer, and today we are previewing for you a game called Restart. Now this game is by designers, I'm going to have to read them, Vangelis Efthimou and Antonius Yiannopoulos. They are from the studio Teetotum Studios, and this is the publisher that actually did Age of Rome last year, which turned out to be one of my biggest surprises of the year. So when they offered us to check out this prototype copy of Restart, we had to say yes. So now let's get into our thoughts.
So in Restart, we find ourselves in a dystopian future where we are tasked with time traveling back in time to save humanity. And so we're going to have to use our skills to change the course of events. However, our mind is not what it used to be. So our perception, intelligence, and memory have been fragmenting over time. And so as we time travel, we're also going to be trying to recover some of these fragments so that we can become more efficient by being able to take more actions or make much better use of the very limited time that we have. The game will take place over 3 different ages, throughout which we will be collecting prosperity points as well. And whoever manages to get the most prosperity points by the end will be the winner. One other thing is, depending on how we finish with the state of events will determine the different dystopia that we will be going into next. Because as everyone knows, in time travel, whenever you
butterfly effect.
Yeah, you mix something up and you change things, like, I think I fixed it. Uh-oh, I made it worse. And so you're actually going to be going through different modes of dystopias as we progress through different modes of the game.
Now, the gameplay and setup for a game of Restart is quite interesting because there's always a modular component that represents the dystopian future that you're playing in. We've set up here the most basic of those futures that they recommend that you start with. This is called Pandemia, which includes this board here where players are going to be rolling dice in the hope to move up these tracks and get some prosperity points or victory points at the end of the game. However, the core part of the puzzle that never changes in Restart is really this abstract kind of color puzzle where you're trying to manipulate the colors that are shown on these event cards in this central tableau. These same event cards act as multi-use cards that you can place onto your player board in order to build up an engine so that you can get more done on each turn. Each player at all times has 3 of these chain cards, which represents a pattern of colors that we want to recreate in this central tableau. Once you're able to achieve this and pay for it, you put it aside, and this is going to give you victory points at the end of the game. You'll then be able to draft a new card, so there's always some new patterns that you're trying to achieve. Now, how are you going to make these patterns? Well, using the cards that you have in your hand on your turn, you'll be able to place your adult figure out into a space where you want to change the color. So for example, I might want to change this one to yellow, so I'll place my adult there. Now, the only restriction here is I cannot go in the same space where my child self is, because that would cause some kind of horrible
space-time continuum disaster.
It would be a disaster. So then I would take a yellow card out of my hand. I'd be able to play it and replace this card. Now, it also gives me a benefit or an action that's going to occur because I've placed this card. And once that's played out, I'm then able to complete one of those chain cards if I'm able to. Now, that is the perception part of your turn, but then we go on to the intelligence part of your turn. And the intelligence part of your turn says that you can take a type A or a type B action. And that's going to differ depending on the module that you've included in this game. So in this particular module, it represents what we can do out here on this board. Now, the other interesting part about this game is along the way, you're going to be collecting fragments, and fragments are going to be placed in these trackers on your player board. And depending on where they are, it's going to activate these other benefits that are going to be able to help you get things done in the module that you're using. So as the game goes on and on, you're getting better at being able to do things in this module. But the other thing that happens is as you build up more and more of these fragments throughout the course of the game, if you have a card here that which is called studying, if you have a card here and you've reached the level of one of these actions, you're then able to do that action when this part, the intelligence stage of your turn, is activated. And then finally, a player will move on to the memory part of their turn. When we activate the memory stage, you're going to essentially collect more goodies. So you need time. It's an important resource that's going to help you get things done in the game. It's also going to get you new event cards that you can either play to change the color here, or study to place out onto your board, or sometimes even bury cards, which allows you to take a card and place it underneath here in order to score points at the end of the game. There's a few other things that you cover in this game. One is adrenaline pills, because adrenaline pills act like a temporary step on these tracks that are going to allow you to get more done, only they get discarded at the end of your turn, unlike the fragment tokens. There's also void tokens that act as a while when you place them on a card, changing that card color temporarily so that you can complete one of your chain cards. And the final thing I'll talk about are these gadget cards, which you get to draft at the beginning of the game, and you have to pay adrenaline tokens in order to get a benefit that's going to help you throughout the course of that particular module. Now we're going to talk about all of these components in much more detail when we talk about our thoughts about the prototype. And I will just remind you that everything you see here is a prototype. So please remember that the components and the rule set are all subject to change. But I'm going to leave it here and we're going to talk about each of the modules as we get into our review and preview of this game. So let's get into that now.
So the first thing that I would like to talk about is this board, in particular, the player board, and the physicality of it, and how it's sort of like it's this cardboard contraption with a couple of little wooden stilts that make it sort of stand up so that it's slightly leaning towards you. But also these elements are modular, so you can actually change the place where you put your character card with like your unique ability, and also your chain cards, which they often do this to me, which I'm always fixing up. Again, this is a prototype, so I'm sure that with the final version there'll be more enhancements.
Yeah, but this is such a centerpiece for the game, and this is going to be the reason why a lot of people are interested in this game. If you see it on the table, it's the first thing you notice, and at first you're like, well, is this more style over substance? And actually I find it quite practical. So there is a slot when you're burying cards. You don't have to like lift up this card to bury cards under, because they just slot right in there. There's a spot for each of these different types of cards. The tracks have indents in them. In the prototype, you know, they do fall in a little bit deep, and so it's a bit harder to get them out, but I'm sure they're fine tuning that. And then the bottom is really interesting because, as we mentioned, this game is modular, and so there are scoring conditions and ways that these tracks work that differ depending on which module you're playing. And so what they've done is they've designed this piece that comes off and flips over, and there's alternative pieces in the box, and that changes the instructions that go along with each one of these phases of the game.
Which is actually really nice to have something that means that all of your things are just kind of concentrated in the one place, and it's sort of angled towards you, and it just feels purposeful. Even though it's meant to be your mind, it's like it feels like this is my main gadget.
This is my dashboard of stuff as I'm traveling through time.
That's right. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is this core puzzle that is probably it's the main consistent thing regardless of what module you bring in. And this core puzzle, I really actually found that even though it actually, in the way that it plays, is quite abstract, because you end up mainly just trying to make a combination of colors based on the cards that you're playing and where you're moving your character around. I did find that because it kind of gives you some focus, and it means that you're kind of really paying attention to, okay, I'm looking at my hand of cards, and I'm looking at not just the ability, but also like what ability am I going to get when I play that, but also where do I want to place it, and is Amy going to be in the way, or because there's this whole thing of you can't go where there's another adult character, and you definitely can't go with your own child characters. And I actually did enjoy that element, in that it's not just a matter of, I made the combination and it's done. You also have to make sure that you have the time tokens available to kind of pay for that once you complete that.
Yeah, and it is interesting because it's a dynamic puzzle, because other people are changing the color of the cards. Should say that in a 3 or 4 player game, there's an extra column of cards as well, so it's slightly bigger space where people are moving around on. But you always have that tension of the multi-use cards of, well, do I want to play it out there so that I can achieve one of these puzzly chain cards? Or do I want to hang on to this card because actually on the left-hand side, there's this really nice engine building ability, and I could really use that, or the victory points, if I am able to play it out onto my board. So you're constantly weighing that up. Plus it is tricky because when you're using these cards out of your hand, you're replacing them and drafting them from this area here, this market area, and sometimes what you need's not coming up. So there are cards that allow you to discard more cards or pick up more cards. There's engine building that allows you to pick up more cards every time. And so you just have to work out how you're going to build up that engine in order to help you get what you need done in this game.
The other thing that I appreciate about this is that it gives you an alternative. If you're getting a bit stuck, you can actually forego one of the sections, one of the action kind of types, to then, for example, if I were to forego all of the actions in my perception phase, I could actually gain a void token, which, as Amy said, is quite powerful because it's essentially making any card that I want into a wild for the rest of my turn, which is usually going to make be the difference between me being able to complete one of these chain cards or not. And the other one is with the main module, which is that A or B, you can actually, again, decide to, for this turn, I'll skip it, and it'll allow me to double the goodies that I get from my memory side. So for example, these time tokens that I'm going to need to pay for things, it allowed me to get double of those, or allow me to get more of these cards. And so I appreciated that flexibility, essentially.
Now, I hate to step in with some Themer reviewing, but I think that what's interesting about this game is when I first read about it, I thought it was going to be more of an adventure style game because there is a campaign that is associated with the game. And really that campaign consists of playing multiple games over the course of a number of sessions because you can swap in and out these modules. But the game itself does play very abstractly. In fact, a lot of the modules especially feel quite abstract. And even the concept when I was first reading about it of like not bumping into your, younger self, I was like, how is that going to come to life? Really, that's just like a tableau blocking mechanism that's occurring here that's stopping me from going onto a particular space. So it's not as immersively thematic as I expected, given the theme.
Yeah, I will definitely agree. The most thematic thing about this is just this thing of your child figure is stuck in their particular age. And so they can move around, but only within that column, essentially, within that row. Whereas you have the freedom to move around anywhere except for where your child is or where other adults are. I don't know why you can't bump into other adults thematically. But anyways, but I do agree that all of the modules actually, like there's the pandemia one, and then there's others that are more like about like kind of conservation, and one about like different chromosomes. They all play out as very different abstract sort of modules.
Yeah, they do. And I want to talk about though how you get there, because I think that part is quite interesting. So depending on the events that the players put into the game in any given game, at the end of the game, we're going to sum up the kind of power that's been contributed to lots of different components of society. And when we've overexhausted one area, that's what's going to lead us to our next dystopian future, i.e. that's going to dictate which module you play in your next game. So that as a concept, I actually really like. It's a really simple way to guide people to their next game. However, when it came to the modules themselves, we did play all of them that were available in the prototype, and they were a little bit hit and miss for us in terms of our evaluation. And in terms of the modules, they're all a bit different mechanically. Pandemia is the simplest. It's all about rolling dice and mitigating against those dice rolls. Then there's Anomi, which is a bit more strategic, but it plays out just like an abstract movement puzzle where you're trying to move up different tracks. Then you've got Extinction, which is the set collection card collecting game where you're trying to make sets and runs, and the things that you're doing with your engine allow you to more carefully draft those cards. And the final module is Ocean Realm, which is the roll and write, which is the most interactive with the core puzzle, because depending on where your adult is or your opponent's adult and children are on the tableau, that dictates where you can draw on your piece of paper, and the engine building elements dictates what you can draw there and how many of them.
One of the things that I felt with these modules is that they were almost just like one very simple mechanic that then is the thing that is like, this whole module. This one is about like dice rolling, and then you're just moving up in these tracks based on the addition of what symbols you get. And then another one is more like a set collection, and you're kind of moving things around. And then another one was like roll and write. So it's almost like the thought of a mechanic as the core driver, but then it's never really fleshed out in a way that's like super compelling. It's like, it's interesting, but it's not like it still feels like it's just a mini side game to this core thing that doesn't really ever change.
Yeah, and the core puzzle, actually, I quite like the core puzzle, and I wish that the modules were adding maybe a little bit more. And of course, this is very early into the development, so they might have some changes planned, but of course, we can only evaluate the game as we've played it. But I think the reason why this game maybe fell a little bit flatter for us than we were expecting is because it's really interesting the way you integrate a new module in. You do, though, need to learn quite a few new rules because every section of a player's turn is going to have a different rule that's associated with it and what happens when you're able to build up these fragments. And so that's shown here. And so there's a little bit of an overhead that you need to okay, I need to learn this new set of rules. I need to learn what the A and the B actions are for this particular module. And because of that, it's a little bit frustrating that the puzzles themselves in the modules aren't more interesting because you're going to all this effort to learn a whole new rule set for what is a really, as Maggie mentioned, kind of just like a side game that feels a little bit tacked on and not integrated because of its nature of being so modular.
So yeah, I agree. So I feel like it's something that feels, I like the concept of this thing of you're kind of plugging in and out all these different modules.
It's like an expansion, a changing expansion.
But the execution so far means that none of them for the like relearning of what you're doing with that component, which actually ends up being quite a central component because it's the reason why you're going up in all of these different fragment tracks. It's like it's never really, the payoff doesn't really feel like it's there.
Yeah, and so of course, if you're interested in this game, I'd encourage you to continue, looking at the development of this game and what's happening with those modules. Of course, be reading the rule books. But the other thing that occurred to us as we were playing this game, which may not change over the course of development, so do think about this in terms of whether this is a game or not for you, is that there is fairly low interaction. So even though people are changing the puzzle, I always feel as though I don't care very much about what anybody else is doing. And I'm a player that likes like a highly interactive where I need to pay attention to what everybody's doing and they need to pay attention, importantly, to my great turns as well. This game doesn't give me that kind of feeling. In fact, player turns can be quite long because, as we've mentioned, there are many different steps that a player needs to follow on their turn, like quite a lot, more than a lot of games that we've played recently. And even though those are shown on your player board, they do change when there's a module involved. And so there's that overhead of kind of like getting back into the game again. But the other part of it is that the game actively encourages you to build up your engine so that you're doing more things on your turn. So as the game goes on, players' turns are getting longer and longer. And it was one of those games where I felt like I could go and make a cup of tea and come back, and I was just more interested in, is it my turn yet? Is it my turn yet?
Yeah.
And so that kind of like head down, quiet, people doing their own thing kind of game is not really my style. So it didn't fit as well for me because of that reason.
I don't usually mind when it's like just like head down and doing that, but I agree. Like I was never interested beyond like, you changed the color that I was invested in, which means I'm gonna need a void token later. I'm gonna have to send my, one of my characters there at some point. Aside from that, because I don't know what you're working towards either, so I don't necessarily know, I'm going to sabotage this, or I'm going to like go and take this thing from you. It's like, no idea.
And it is interesting because even though you're doing more and more, there's no like huge combo, there's no powerful, I just made like 30 points all in one turn. So it's just that you're doing more little things.
Little incremental, like, okay. And like probably the biggest point hits that you get is if you manage to complete these chain cards come in 3 levels. So the level 3s are the ones that give you the most points. And obviously because of, they're the most complicated to get. That's probably, and even then when you do that, it kind of feels a little bit like, okay, and I paid for it.
And then I'll move on to my next one.
And I move on to the next,
So it is the game of like small little increments. It's a game of like trying to extend your turn. And it is like a fairly quiet kind of do your own thing style game. That's going to work for some people and not for others. It didn't quite hit for us the way we thought it was going to. But I have to say that there's some really interesting components here. I really think the board is innovative. I love this. It's really cool. It gives you be a real, like, instead of just having cards lying out in front of you, it makes it feel like this is my space and I've got things going on. I think a lot of people are really going to like that component of it. And of course, this is a prototype. So there will be more development and, you know, but I have to say, like, I hope they put a lot more work into the rule book and some of the iconography, because this is a game that's going to rely so heavily on you being able to move on to the next module and get up and running really quickly, because your friends are waiting for that next episode. So I'd like to see some more work done there. But we hope this was helpful to work out if this is a game for you. If it was, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.